Ireland's coastline stretches over 3,000 kilometres. Cliffs, coves, inlets and islands. Beautiful by day. But after dark, something else wakes beneath the waves. The sea remembers. It holds onto sorrow, secrets, the souls that were never laid to rest. In this series, we explore 10 terrifying tales from haunted islands and cursed lighthouses to sea spirits that whisper your name from beneath the tide. These are the Irish ghosts trapped in the sea, and once you hear their stories, you might never stand near the water again. The Sea Child of Blackmir Cove. On the west coast of Clare lies a narrow inlet known as Blackmir Cove. The cliffs around it are sharp and steep, the tide fast and cruel. It's not on many maps. Most locals won't even mention it by name. They say a child lives there, but not the kind you'd ever want to meet. The legend begins in 1856, when a baby was found washed up on the rocks, wrapped in seaweed, eyes wide open and perfectly still, not breathing, not crying. A couple from the nearby village, Thomas and Mary Kearney, took the infant in. They named him Finn. At first everything seemed normal, but the boy never spoke, never aged, never blinked. He'd sit by the fire for hours, staring at the flames, unmoving. Mary would sometimes find puddles of seawater beneath his cradle, even in the middle of a dry summer. Animals wouldn't go near him. By the time Finn should have been 4, he still looked like a newborn. And then one night, during a full moon, he vanished. Mary said she awoke to the sound of waves inside the house. When she ran to the cradle, it was full of salt water. No child. Thomas searched the cove for weeks, but all he ever found was a trail of wet footprints leading down the rocks to the sea. Most thought it was grief, a delusion. But then others started seeing him. Over the next century, dozens of people reported glimpses of a child standing alone on the rocks at Blackmir Cove. Always the same, pale skin, dark eyes, no more than 6 months old, completely still, even as the wind howled around him. A tourist who tried to photograph him fell from the cliffs. His camera was never recovered, but divers claimed to hear a baby crying underwater for hours afterward. In 1983, a fisherman named Pat Donnelly rescued what he believed was a drowning child just offshore. He pulled the boy onto his boat, but the second they made eye contact, Pat collapsed. His crewmates said he went stiff, like he'd been frozen in place. It took 3 hours before he could speak again. And when he did, all he said was, "He knew my name." No child was ever found on the boat. Some say Finn was never a child at all, but something older wearing a child's shape. A sea spirit that feeds on grief, confusion, and pity. Others believe he's the stolen soul of a changeling, left behind by something far worse. Blackmir Cove is quiet now. The cliffs have eroded, and the path is all but gone. But every so often, when the mist rolls in, someone spots the child again, still not moving, still staring, waiting for someone to come close, and then it takes you. The Widow of Inishglass. Off the coast of County Mayo, where jagged rocks tear through Atlantic waves, there's a stretch of sea known as Widow's Pass. Fishermen still call it that today, though few know where the name comes from. The real story lies in the ruins of Inishglass, a tiny, uninhabited island now swallowed by grass, gulls and salt. They say Inishglass was once home to a small fishing village. A dozen families lived there, hardy people, cut off from the mainland except by boat. Among them was a woman named Moira Fenn, whose husband, Declan, captained the strongest curragh on the island. In the winter of 1842, the sea grew cruel. Boats were smashed against the rocks. Nets came back torn and empty. Then came the storm. It rolled in fast, a wall of water and wind that turned the sky black and the sea white. Moira begged Declan not to go out that night, but he and 4 others rowed out into the storm. They never returned. For 3 days, Moira waited by the shore. When the tide finally calmed, wreckage floated to the rocks. A torn piece of sail, a man's boot, a wooden crossbeam, but no bodies. The priest told her to grieve. The neighbours brought food, but Moira would not leave the shoreline. She sat on the same rock every night, whispering to the sea, eyes fixed on the horizon. Then, one evening at twilight, she walked into the water and disappeared beneath the surface. A week later, another storm hit. But this time it was stranger than before. The waves didn't just crash, they screamed. Fishermen on the mainland reported hearing a woman's voice calling out from the sea. "Declan!" she wept. "Declan, come home!" Boats anchored in safe harbours were torn loose and smashed against docks. And then, the sightings began. Over the next 50 years, nearly every drowning off the coast near Inishglass came with the same report. A woman seen walking on the waves just before the boat went under. She wore a dark shawl, her eyes were pale, and she was always whispering a name. By the 1920s, the island was abandoned. The fishing families had all left, but the widow remained. In 1974, a crew of divers exploring the reef near Inishglass vanished during a routine survey. One of their GoPro cameras was found caught in seaweed 3 days later. The footage is grainy, but you can still hear the last minute. A garbled voice in the background, repeating one word: Declan. Locals say the spirit of Moira Fenn is trapped in the sea, still searching, still calling out to a husband who never returned. And those who cross her path, especially those who dare to speak her name aloud on the water, are pulled under to join her. Today, Inishglass is marked on no maps. The few who try to find it are met with thick fog, failing compasses, and voices that come from below. They say the sea never forgets, and some spirits never let go. The screaming tide of Kellen Bay. There's a horseshoe-shaped cove in County Waterford, just beyond a cliff called Kellen Head. Tourists rarely find it, and locals tend to look away when it's mentioned. Because once a year, without warning, the tide there begins to scream. Not howl, not roar, scream. The story goes back to 1911, when a ship called the Starling ran aground off Kellen Bay during a fog so thick it choked the cliffs. The ship wasn't from Ireland. It came from Liverpool, bound for France, and was carrying crates of iron, barrels of whiskey, and 17 passengers. Nobody knows why the captain steered it so close to shore. Some say he was trying to outrun something on the sea. Others say it was already too late. The ship was found smashed against the rocks, broken clean in half. But no bodies were ever recovered, not one. The strange part came 3 days later. A farmer walking the clifftop heard something rise with the tide. Not wind, not water. It was a sound like people screaming, dozens of them all at once beneath the surface, and then it stopped. At first, people called it nerves, or wind tunnels, or old superstitions, until it happened again. A year later, same day, same hour, same screams. A priest was called in. He stood on the edge of the cove and threw holy water into the sea. He never came back. His hat washed up days later, split down the middle like something had slashed it. For decades, no one would go near Kellen Bay after dark, and certainly not on the anniversary. But curiosity has its own tide, and in the 1990s, a group of paranormal researchers from Cork came to investigate. They camped above the cliffs, set up sound equipment, and waited. Only one of them returned. She was found 2 miles inland, barefoot, clothes soaking wet, hair full of sand and seaweed. She kept whispering the same phrase over and over. "They're still screaming." She never spoke again. Every year since then, the pattern has held. On the same night, the tide rolls in, and with it comes the noise. If you're close enough, you can feel it in your chest. Like something just under the water is crying out for help, or dragging someone down. Locals say the spirits of the passengers never left. Whatever they saw that night in 1911 is still happening, caught in some loop between tide and time, and the sea, for all its vastness, has become their prison. Fishermen claim the screams aren't random. They follow you. Boats that pass too close report the water turning black beneath them, the sound building like a storm trapped inside a tunnel. One man, an old sailor who's lived near the bay his whole life, said it best. "It's not just screaming you hear. If you listen long enough, they start saying your name." The drowning bell of Rathlin Sound. Between the rugged cliffs of County Antrim and the isolated shores of Rathlin Island, there's a narrow, volatile stretch of sea called Rathlin Sound. The tides there are violent and unpredictable. Waves slam through the channel like something's chasing them. But every so often, when the sea is calm and the air turns still, the wind dies down and another sound begins to rise. A bell. Not a lighthouse bell, not a buoy warning. This bell tolls from deep beneath the surface, and it doesn't just echo, it calls. The origin of the bell is tied to a ship that vanished in the 18th century, the Brigid's Lantern. In 1745, it left Belfast bound for the Hebrides. Aboard were barrels of fine whiskey, bolts of linen, and a strange item listed only in the ship's manifest as funeral bell sacred. Local historians believe it was a relic from Glendalough, a silver bell forged by monks and used during last rites, said to guide souls safely into the afterlife. The Brigid's Lantern never reached its destination. A freak storm rolled in as the ship entered Rathlin Sound. Lightning split the sky. Gale-force winds churned the sea into a nightmare. And just like that, the vessel was gone. No wreckage washed ashore. No bodies were found. It was as if the ocean had swallowed it whole. A week later, the first toll was heard. A fishing boat returning to Ballycastle Harbour passed through the sound at dusk. The crew heard it, a soft, steady clang echoing through the hull. It came every few minutes, low and deliberate, like a bell tolling at a funeral. They looked for a source. There was nothing above water. When they reached shore, one of the crew refused to speak. The captain, a man with 20 years at sea, told his family he would never sail again. He burned his nets the next morning and left the village for good. Over the years, more sightings came. Ships sailing too close reported hearing the bell. Then came the hallucinations. Figures moving beneath the surface, hands reaching from the foam, ghostly faces pressed against the glass of portholes. One boat drifted in without its crew. The deck was wet, but the sea had been calm. On the captain's log, the last entry was a single line. The bell tolls for me now. In 1891, a diver named Patrick Rowe claimed to have found the wreck. He'd heard the stories, dismissed them as superstition, and set out to explore the sea floor near the island's edge. He descended alone, confident and well-equipped. When he surfaced, he was a different man. Shaking, silent, his eyes wide and unfocused. It took hours before he spoke, and even then, all he could say was, "They're still down there, still ringing it." Rowe later described a haunting scene. The shipwreck resting upright on the seabed, as if placed there, untouched by time. And beside it, the silver bell, half buried in sand, tolling without movement. Around it floated a crowd of faces. Not bodies, just faces, eyes open, mouths moving, like a choir underwater. The site was never found again. Since then, Rathlin Sound has claimed many more. Each year, in early November, the bell rings again. Sometimes once, sometimes many times. It's always at night. And it always begins with complete silence, the kind that presses into your chest before something breaks it. Locals say the bell is cursed, that it never stopped doing its job, guiding souls to the next world. But something went wrong. Instead of leading the dead out of the sea, it called more in. Now it doesn't guide, it lures. The people of Rathlin Island have a rule. If you hear the bell, you don't speak, you don't light a candle, you don't even look at the water, because once you hear the bell toll your name, you've already begun to drown. The lighthouse that blinks. Off the southern coast of Ireland, near a jagged inlet called Ferro Point, stands a forgotten lighthouse. It doesn't appear on modern charts. It hasn't functioned for decades, but fishermen, sailors, and night watchers alike all say the same thing. Sometimes the lighthouse blinks, not a steady rotation, not a sweeping beam, just a single flash. Sudden, blinding, and unmistakably real. The structure itself is called Clareview Light, built in 1862 and decommissioned just after the Second World War. According to the official records, a sudden rockfall during a coastal storm cut the lighthouse off from access. Engineers deemed it too expensive to repair, and it was left to rot. Today, It's little more than a salt-stained skeleton of stone and rust, hunched like a dying tooth over the Atlantic. But the light still flashes. The stories surrounding Clareview Light are older than the lighthouse itself. Long before the tower was built, the locals believed the rocky point was cursed. Several drownings occurred there in the late 1700s, including 3 children whose bodies were never recovered. For years afterward, strange lights were seen flickering across the water, pale and fast, like someone waving a lantern. Then came the shipwrecks. From 1805 to 1850, no fewer than 11 vessels were dashed against the rocks below Faro Point. Survivors spoke of seeing a guiding light in the storm, brighter than the moon, leading them toward what they believed was safety. But it wasn't the moon, it wasn't safety, it was the blink. Locals petitioned the Crown to build a lighthouse there, and in 1862, Clareview Light opened with a staff of 2 men, a keeper named Samuel Kerr and his assistant, Doyle Martin. Both were experienced. Both were dead within the year. Samuel disappeared during a calm summer evening. Doyle found the tower's top hatch open and Samuel's boots at the edge, but no body. Doyle reported hearing a knocking beneath the floorboards for 3 nights before he vanished too. His journal was later recovered. The last entry simply read, "It blinked again." Since then, no one has lived in the lighthouse. But people keep seeing the light. In 1967, a passenger ferry reported a sudden blinding flash as it neared the coast. The ship altered course and nearly struck submerged rocks, the exact area Clareview was built to warn against. The captain swore under oath that the light came from the tower. Authorities dismissed it as electrical reflection. But 2 passengers went missing during the confusion. Their luggage was later found inside the old lighthouse, dry and untouched. In 2004, a kayaker who paddled too close to Faro Point disappeared for 72 hours. When he was found, drifting miles from shore, half dehydrated and sunburned, he claimed he'd seen a figure standing in the top of the tower waving. "I thought she wanted help," he said. "Then the light blinked and everything went white." Who the woman was, no one knows, but several others have reported seeing a pale female figure in the tower, always just before the blink. Some believe the lighthouse is haunted by those who drowned nearby. Others say the tower itself is alive, a kind of sea spirit that hungers for the lost and lures them in like a siren. The blinking light is not a warning, they say, it's a trap. Locals have learned not to look at it. If you're sailing past Faro Point at night, you keep your eyes down, you don't check the shoreline, you certainly don't steer toward any light, because once you've seen the blink, even just once, the sea starts watching you back. The island that screams. In the waters off the coast of Donegal, west of the Rosses, lies a speck of land called Inishdarn, a jagged, grass-covered island barely larger than a football field. On most maps, it's just a smudge, a place to avoid because of sharp reefs and sudden fog. But those who live near it know the real reason to stay away. At night, Inishdarn screams. It starts with a low sound, like the wind rising through a cave. Then it sharpens, a human wail, unmistakable, not one voice but hundreds, some high-pitched, others hoarse and ragged. It only lasts a few minutes, but those who've heard it say the noise doesn't leave your ears. It burrows in, like water in your skull. The island was once inhabited over a century ago. A fishing hamlet stood on its southern edge. No more than 6 stone cottages and a church, all gone now. The last people to live there were the Brennan family, 5 brothers, and their mother, a widow named Nuala. According to local folklore, the family kept to themselves. Fishermen from the mainland rarely visited, and when they did, they left quickly. They said the Brennans spoke in whispers, as if afraid to raise their voices. Some swore the island changed them, that the sea around Inishdarn was cursed. Then came the night of the storm. In January 1903, a fierce tempest hit the Donegal coast. Waves taller than houses smashed into the cliffs. Entire boats vanished. When it was over, messengers were sent to check on the island. What they found was worse than silence. The Brennan cottage had been torn apart, roof gone, doors ripped from the hinges. The chapel's stone cross was snapped clean in 2. But strangest of all, there were no bodies. Not drowned, not buried, Not anywhere, just handprints in the mud. Dozens of them leading down to the water. Some were small, like a child's, others were long and thin, with too many fingers. In the weeks that followed, the screaming began. At first it was just once, late at night during a full moon, then more frequently. The Coast Guard who first recorded it quit his post 2 days later and never returned. His final logbook entry read, "It's not the wind, they want out." Since then, no one has dared stay on the island overnight. In 1979, a group of university students from Galway tried to camp there for a research project. Only one returned to shore the next morning, barefoot, covered in scratches, unable to speak. She was taken to hospital, where she drew pictures of faces pressed against stone walls and mouths filled with water. The screams have continued. Locals say they're getting louder. Some believe the island is cursed ground, a site where ancient rites were once performed and forgotten. Others think it's a prison for souls lost at sea, pulled back to the surface by something older and crueler than death. But there's a darker theory that the Brennans never left, that they were taken by the sea itself, not drowned, but transformed, and now call out not for rescue, but for company. The fishermen have a rule now. If you hear the screams while at sea, you don't turn your boat, you don't look at the island, and above all, you never scream back, because if you do, they'll know where you are. And next time, it won't just be voices you hear. The Bride Beneath the Bay. In the quiet harbour town of Carnshore, nestled along Ireland's eastern coast, locals warn tourists to stay away from the water on one night of the year, June 14th. It's not a festival, it's not a memorial. It's the anniversary of a wedding that never happened, and the woman who still waits beneath the waves. The legend begins in 1926. A man named Michael Redden, son of a wealthy merchant, planned to marry a local girl named Annie Doran. Annie was known for her kindness and her strange habit of walking the beach at night, as if waiting for something. She'd grown up by the sea, the daughter of a boat builder, and could row a skiff better than most men. But in Carnshore that didn't matter. What mattered was that Michael loved her, and the whole town prepared for their wedding. The night before the ceremony, Annie went out onto the water. Some say she needed time alone. Others claim she was seen standing at the edge of the quay, speaking to someone no one else could see. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Her empty boat was found drifting just beyond the cove. The oars were tied neatly across the middle seat. Her veil was still in the bottom of the boat, folded. Michael was devastated. He never married. He died 10 years later, said to have thrown himself into the same bay where Annie vanished. That should have been the end of it. But every year after her disappearance, on the exact date she vanished, people began reporting strange things. A figure walking through the mist, a woman in a white dress standing ankle-deep in the water, not moving. Boats moored at the dock would begin to sway, though the tide was still. And once, in 1952, a fisherman who stayed out too late claimed a pale hand reached up from the sea and gripped the side of his boat. He said the hand wore a wedding ring. By the 1980s, the sightings became harder to dismiss. A diving group exploring the bay recorded sonar images of something human-shaped standing upright on the sea floor. No body was recovered, but the footage made its way to the local newspaper and was quietly pulled a week later after one of the divers drowned in his bathtub. What truly unsettles people, though, is the tide itself. On June 14th, the water pulls in harder. Seaweed gathers in the shape of footprints along the shore. Dogs refuse to go near the beach. And always, just after midnight, someone hears it. A woman's voice calling from beneath the waves. Some believe Annie was taken by something ancient, something jealous of love and drawn to joy. Others say she made a pact, that her wedding was never meant for this world, and that she waits for Michael still, down there in the dark. There's a bench overlooking the bay now, placed there by a descendant of the Redden family. Etched into the stone is a simple line. She never came home. And every year, someone places a single white flower beside it. No one ever sees who. There's no official warning for Carnshore, no sign on the pier, just whispers, and the understanding that the sea there holds on to things, memories, sorrow, promises left unfinished. Not everything that vanishes wants to be found. The Salt Man of Strand. On the south coast of Ireland, near a windswept stretch of sand called Strand, fishermen used to tell a story, the kind passed down quietly, between pints, always after dark. They called him the Salt Man, and no one could agree if he was once a person, or something that came from the sea, wearing a man's shape. What they did agree on was this. If you saw him standing at the edge of the tide, you turned around, you went home, and you locked your door. The earliest stories come from the 1840s. Back then, Killara was home to a tiny fishing village, no more than a handful of cottages, clustered between the dunes and the cliffs. People made a simple living pulling mackerel from the shallows, but they spoke in hushed tones about the man who would appear after storms, tall, gaunt, and slick with brine. He never walked. He just stood at the shoreline, facing the sea. Not moving, not blinking, just watching the waves. They say his skin looked like it was made of packed salt, cracked and crusted, seaweed clung to his arms, his eyes were pale, almost silver, and if you got too close, you'd hear a sound coming from inside him, like water sloshing through an empty shell. No one ever saw him arrive. He was simply there, like driftwood washed ashore. And the moment you took your eyes off him, he'd be gone. At first, people avoided the beach, but then things began to happen. Boats started drifting back empty, nets torn, oars snapped, animals refused to eat fish caught near the strand. And once, after a particularly violent storm, the sand turned white overnight, as if the entire shore had been dusted with salt. In 1889, a local boy named Connor disappeared. He'd gone out early to search for gull eggs. His footprints were found leading out onto the strand, but none came back. Just a pool of water in the shape of a man, right at the tide line. His mother claimed to see Connor that night, standing beside the Salt Man. She said her son's skin looked like stone, and his mouth was open in a silent scream. Years passed. The village emptied. Some left because of bad catches, others because they simply couldn't sleep anymore. Not with the sound of footsteps outside their windows on moonlit nights. Always slow, always heavy, like something dragging itself across the dunes. By the 1960s, the cottages were ruins, half buried by sand. Only one family remained, the Reardons, who refused to leave. In 1971, their home burned to the ground. No bodies were recovered, just walls encrusted with salt. Since then, Strand has remained untouched. Locals don't walk their dogs there. No one swims. And when storms hit, people draw their curtains and keep their fires lit. Occasionally, someone still spots him, out past the surf, or standing beside a rock where no footprints should be. They say he's not a ghost. Not exactly, more like a memory the sea refuses to let go of. Or maybe something it created to remind us who really rules the shoreline. Whatever he is, he never speaks. He just waits for the tide to turn. The Bellringers of Stonewake Reef. Just off the coast of Wexford lies a jagged, half-submerged cluster of rocks known as Stonewake Reef. To ships, it's a hazard. Unlit, barely visible at low tide. But to those who've spent their lives near it, it's something else entirely. They call it cursed. The name comes from an old belief that the rocks themselves used to ring like bells when struck by the waves. That was centuries ago, before sailors reported seeing figures moving on the reef during storms. Too far out to be real, too solid to be shadows. The legend says they are Bellringers, drowned monks who once lived on a monastery built on the reef before the sea swallowed it whole. In the 1300s, long before the reef was bare stone, there was a small stone chapel out there, built by 7 monks who sought isolation and peace. They were known for their strict silence. They didn't speak. They rang bells, different tones for different prayers. The sound could carry across the sea for miles. Locals grew used to hearing it drift across the water at dawn and dusk, a reminder that someone was out there, praying in solitude. But something went wrong. The story says one winter, the bells didn't stop. They rang at strange hours, midnight, noon, the dead of night. Always fast, always desperate. Then they went silent. No one heard from the monks again. When fishermen rowed out in the spring, They found the chapel empty, doors open, food rotting, and the bell tower still swaying. But no monks, just robes laid neatly at the edge of the tide, and 7 ropes stretching out into the sea. Over time, the sea reclaimed the island, the chapel collapsed, the rocks were left behind, and with them, the stories. People began hearing the bells again, but now only during storms or when someone was about to drown nearby. Survivors of wrecks claimed they saw men on the reef, pulling invisible ropes. Some said they heard chanting beneath the waves, a deep, slow rhythm that made no sense but echoed in their skulls for days afterward. In 1955, a Navy diver exploring the reef for a survey surfaced in a panic. He said there was something down there. Not ruins, but a chapel. Intact. Covered in barnacles and silt, but whole. And inside it, the bells were still swinging. His report was dismissed. He retired a month later, moved inland, never spoke about the sea again. Then, in 1981, a fishing vessel vanished just off the reef. No mayday, no storm, no sign of wreckage, just a single buoy, drifting in the swell, with a rusted bronze bell tied to it by seaweed. Since then, the reef has been avoided. Boats don't pass near it. Sonar readings go strange. Locals say the Bellringers are still down there, still pulling on ropes, calling something back from below. And if you hear the bells near Stonewake Reef, you don't pray, you row, because they only ring for those the sea has already claimed. The drowned room of Westmere Pier. At the edge of a forgotten fishing village called Westmere, there's a ruined pier that juts out into the Atlantic like a broken finger. The wooden boards are soft with rot, the stone base cracked by time and tide. No boats moor there now, not since the room was discovered beneath it. They call it the Drowned Room, a small square chamber built directly into the stone foundation, accessible only when the tide is at its lowest. There's no door, no stairs, just a jagged opening just below the pier's lip, large enough for one person to crawl through. Nobody knew it existed until 1932, when a boy named Brendan Kearns vanished while playing on the rocks. The tide was out, the day calm. His footprints led straight to the edge of the pier and stopped. The search turned up nothing. But a few days later, another boy found the opening. Inside the drowned room, carved into damp stone, was something chilling. A child's handprint, pressed deep, still wet. At first, people thought it was just an old smuggler's hideout. Maybe a fish cellar, long abandoned. But when others tried to enter, they reported strange things. One man claimed the water inside was warm, even though it had just been touched by the open sea. Another said he saw shadows crawling along the ceiling. And everyone who entered, every single one, described the same thing. A feeling like someone was waiting inside, just beyond sight, just behind them. In 1947, a historian named Daniel Reeve decided to document the room. He entered with a rope tied to his waist, a torch, and a reel-to-reel recorder. The tape survives. It lasts 6 minutes. The first 5 are nothing but splashing, quiet breathing, and occasional notes. Then, suddenly, a whisper, software slurred, impossible to place. Then another voice joins it, then another. Within 30 seconds, the tape is filled with dozens of whispering voices, all rising into a frantic chant. The rope was pulled out minutes later. There was nothing on the end of it. Daniel was never seen again. After that, the village began to unravel. Boats returned damaged. Nets came back empty. The sea felt off. The town emptied. By the 1970s, only a handful of families remained, and even they wouldn't go near the pier. The strangest part? The drowned room changes shape. Every time someone enters, the walls are different. Some report shelves, others see carvings. One woman, a diver from Limerick, swears the room had furniture, chairs set around a table of stone, all underwater. She said she turned her torch off for just a second. When she turned it back on, the chairs were full. She never dove again. Today, the pier is collapsing. Seagrass grows between the boards. The opening to the room is almost gone, but on especially low tides, it reveals itself. Dark. Waiting. And every so often, someone goes in, on a dare, out of curiosity, out of grief. They never come back the same, if they come back at all. The sea around Ireland has swallowed more than just ships. It's taken lovers, monks, children, even memories, and sometimes it gives something back, not alive, not dead, but watching. Whether it's a silent figure on the rocks or a whisper in the surf, every coastline has its shadow. So if you ever hear your name carried by the tide, don't answer. Some spirits are still waiting for someone to take their place.